Kate Milafalcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. And this is a continuation of our book. We're on video number 4 of Opus by Gareth Gore. The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. And this is a discussion of the history, evolution, and predominance of the organization Opus Dei, the work of God. A secretive Catholic cult, allegedly. Okay, we're on video number 4. We're still partway through chapter. It was too long, I had to break it up. So we're talking about Archbishop Cushing of Boston, and he's going sour on Opus Dei. He sort of started out sour, sort of let them lure him in, but he changed his mind completely when they started expanding their real estate holdings. Harvard went co-ed. And when Harvard went co-ed, Opus Dei didn't want to expand and let women live in these residence halls. And so they had a fight with the Archbishop. Ortega Porras, the English-speaking Opus Dei guy that was brought in because he spoke English, he didn't want women. These people are all misogynists. That's not allegedly. They've proven it over and over. He said they are able to do more work than men, and they eventually take over. That's kind of a two-sided praise or criticism. So they had a new chaplain at Harvard, the Harvard Catholic Club, and he fired 2 priests who were part of the clergy there because they were Opus Dei, because he didn't like their tactics and the measures were questionable, underhanded, and deceitful, is how he described it. Cushing ordered Opus Dei to stop all of its activities. Stop recruiting, stop preachifying, just stop what you're doing because you guys basically can't be trusted to do the right thing. Well, guess what happened? Opus Dei ignored the Archbishop and escalated their activities. Escrivá felt that he was a law unto himself. He had always ignored the Vatican, and sidestepped the whole hierarchy, and now he was flagrantly doing it in the face of Archbishop Cushing. The Vatican, the bishop, the entire Catholic Church, he just ignored them all for self-aggrandizement. Opus Dei had a platform to recruit elites at Harvard, and they weren't going to stop. They bought an 80-acre private school in Massachusetts to create a private girls' boarding school. Keep in mind that they're beginning to understand that there's pushback from students who are university age. They're not buying what they have to sell. And so they're moving slowly away from residential halls associated with campuses and going into boarding schools, grade schools, and high schools around the country to get younger people. In 1964, they bought a 5-story mansion, the Tiffany Mansion in Boston, for $400,000. That's just astounding. A low price compared to today. They called it the Bay Ridge Residence. They also bought a 17th century chateau outside Paris, a manor in the East Sussex countryside in London, a huge estate in Ireland, and a French Renaissance-style mansion on the banks of the St. Lawrence River outside Montreal in Canada. The movement was also setting up a 6th form college in Kenya and a university in Peru. Crazy. Escrivá was trying to force the Vatican to accept him by just expanding so much that it's like a tidal wave and the Vatican could do nothing to stop it. He met with Pope Paul VI and once again, Pope Paul said, no, we're not going to give you higher status. This is what it's all about. He tried again the next year, told no again. He was turned down by the Pope 10 times. So he considered actually a rupture from the Pope, from the church in general, and or otherwise like a schism from the Vatican. He sent an emissary to the Greek Orthodox Church to see how that would go. Maybe they'll have us. And they said, no, thank you, but no, thank you. But members were willing to choose this cult of personality and betray the interests of the church that they professed to belong to. There were a number of senior departures within Opus Dei as time went by because they didn't like the direction they saw things going, especially the original members. They didn't like the corruption that was becoming really obvious. One top priest fled to Mexico in the middle of the night. They tracked him down and threatened his life to keep him quiet. Those who were left within the organization were harassed. So an example would be Miguel Fisac, I think is how he says it. He left, period. His 6-year-old daughter had died from the complications of polio vaccine. And Escrivá sent 2 priests to tell him that her death was God's punishment because he left Opus Dei. Nice, huh? There was discontent within the ranks of Opus Dei. They even went so far as to get Opus Dei doctors to prescribe more sedatives to pacify members. Many were too dependent as professionals on their money and on the emotional support of Opus Dei. The public face of Opus Dei was not what it was really like inside the organization. It was been described as the wild, wild west of lawlessness. The members were put in competition for resources like positions. It's a little bit like Nazi Germany. Hitler did this too. Escrivá was capricious and demanding. He decided to take control of the narrative by arranging interviews with big international publications and sort of spinning in the media of the time the image of Opus Dei to improve it. So he was stage managing what people thought of the organization. He refused to do it in person. He wasn't going to be put on the spot. So magazines could submit a list of questions, and then he and Opus Dei members would sit around and figure out how they were going to answer them. And while this was all going on, he was very sick with diabetes. And this is the diabetes that was cured by the miracle cure sometime before, if I don't know if you remember that. Apparently the miracle didn't take. He was losing recruits because, you know, like I said, late 60s, students were rejecting tradition, rejecting the stringent controls. And they were even having problems in Spain. He was targeting these younger children, hoping that he could draw them in so young that they would be malleable. This is his new strategy. But they had a new scandal in Spain in July of 1969. Opus Dei Juan Reyes, a textile company owner, who used Opus Dei to get huge amount of money, used the connections there to get a huge amount of money to finance the export of what he called a groundbreaking loom, and had this loom made in a bunch of different countries. And he said he had a patent on it. Well, the whole thing was a fraud. Now, the book didn't really explain what was fraudulent, if it was no loom, or if it didn't work, or if they didn't make it, even though they claimed they had a patent. It wasn't clear. But it was a huge fraud worth about $1.5 billion in today's money. People paid for the looms and never got them all over the world. And the money instead went into the pockets of Opus Dei, and also they donated money to the Nixon campaign. So they were also involved in government, as we know. The Phalange leaked it to the press, and about all the connections. They went on a big public thing, and we talked about that. And Franco got really mad at them for doing that. He was really worried about his government looking bad because Opus Dei was so entrenched in the government. He wasn't worried about the corruption being revealed. He was worried about what will people think of our Opus Dei and our government. Opus Dei had been lobbying Franco, and Franco was sick and medicated and not really in his right mind, and they were busy whispering in his ear against the Phalangists. Franco sided with Opus Dei, dismissed the Phalangists. He formed a new government with 10 out of the 19 people in top of the government being Opus Dei members. So Opus Dei increased in power, and one of the founders of the Phalangists made a public display of doing himself in with a note in his pocket blaming Opus Dei for everything they had done. But it was secure in Spain now because it had taken more power out of the government, but not secure with the Vatican. The Vatican had a special commission to investigate all these complaints against Opus Dei, especially that Opus Dei was challenging the authority of the Pope. 3 out of the 5 cardinals on this commission were anti-Opus Dei. Escrivá asked the Pope's permission to form a Congress of members of his own to revise the rules of Opus Dei in accordance with the Second Vatican Council to get ahead of this commission. So when he heard this commission, which was heavily weighted against Opus Dei, when he heard about it, he tried to get ahead of it and prevent damage. So he went to the Pope and said, what if we rewrite our rules? And this was more like appeared to be fidelity to the church and to the Vatican Council, but in private it really wasn't. Escrivá was very vocally, in private, behind closed doors, very vocally anti-Second Vatican Council, and he told his priests to keep the old ways. We're just going to pretend. So in the Congress, he told all of them that they would be banned from Opus Dei if they changed anything. He wanted no updates. So this Congress that he presented to the Pope as an opportunity to update Opus Dei was all done behind closed doors. And he told them, shut your mouths. We're keeping everything the way it was. I don't want to hear a word out of any of you. And he rewrote the Constitution of Opus Dei. Yes, he did, as he told the Pope he would, except he told the Pope he would rewrite it to abide by the Second Vatican Council. He actually rewrote it to get rid of any compromises he made in the past and go back to the very original form from the early 40s. He was so egotistical because of the number of members that they had. And he wrote to the Pope, and he got kind of over his own skis and started bragging to the Pope about how great he was. And he had to go groveling to apologize. Pope was really mad with him. Eventually, they reached some kind of a compromise. And this is a little not clear to me, but the Pope kind of met him halfway, and the Vatican investigation was dropped. In 1971, there were complaints again about them that he had spies in the Vatican. He always had. Opus Dei members were required by membership to tell everything to him. Their first and only loyalty could be to him. Escrivá assured the Pope that they wouldn't spy on him. Oh, we could never think of that. Well, he lied. In 1973, he had his first meeting with the Pope in 6 years, and the Pope gave him the cold shoulder. He, at the same time, Escrivá made what he called apostolic trips to much adulation all across Latin America. and they filmed it, which was a little unusual for the times, but they did it to use to reinforce the personality cult within the group. They heavily edited it. Anything bad that happened, they edited it out. Any slips he made, they edited it out. He actually at a rally, he got all worked up. This is an example. He got all worked up publicly at this rally and went off in this sort of obsessive rant against the sex obsession of the young. He called young people wretches, that they form disgusting families and have rotten children. He also complained about the Pope. This is vocally, publicly, and he was very angry. Well, they cut that out of the video. So there was a shrine in the Pyrenees that had been built in honor of him. It was a monument, and they actually cut down a mountain in order to make it happen. And they built a basilica. It seems like they're always building basilicas or going to basilicas. If I remember correctly, basilica, from the Latin, from the Romans, if I remember, is the seat that the bishop, archbishop, one of those big guys, actually, it's literally like a throne. And so a church that is where the archbishop or the bishop or whoever is the basilica. So they built this monument to him. The plans were ambitious. A mountain was leveled. Basilica, 4 chapels, 2 conference halls, a research center, museum, bell tower, courtyard, 40 confessional boxes, as many as Lourdes, and the vast number of pilgrims he predicted would visit the site. He visited the site by helicopter. Oh, it's so great. It's wonderful. We are very happy. And anyway, he didn't get to see the completion of it because June 26, 1975, he collapsed and died. They tried to resuscitate him for 90 minutes. They woke everybody to pray to get him to come back to life. I'm not making this up. They tried to revive his dead body. It didn't work. That's news, I'm sure. So within 5 months, Franco died. And so these top 2 leaders of Opus Dei, the 2 most influential leaders, I guess you would say, Franco wasn't really part of it, but very powerful. They were gone. And the Vatican was really openly hostile to Opus Dei. They were like, thank God he's gone. Now maybe we can get rid of the group. The cult had an uncertain future. Now we're on chapter 6, Habemus Papam in Rome, 1978. That means we have a pope. That's what they say when they elect a pope. There was concern in the Vatican about too much of a progressive shift in direction in the Vatican, Pope John the 23rd, even Pope Paul. So before the conclave to replace Paul VI, because he died, the head of Opus Dei, Del Portillo, had met with a Polish priest, the Archbishop of Krakow, and met in Rome when he came to attend Paul's funeral. He was on friendly terms with the guy, the head of Opus Dei, Portillo. This Archbishop of Krakow was not progressive. So the conclave's first choice was this other guy, not the guy from Poland, was a different guy. And they lit the smoke, but it didn't come out white. It came out uncertain. And they did it 4 times, and it came out uncertain. And so it didn't come out white, which said Habemus Papam, until the 5th time. And they took it as a bad omen. And within a month, the new Pope, John Paul I, died. He died 33 days later. And I looked up the number 33 because it reminded me of Jesus in the desert, and 33 is supposed to be such a significant number. It represents divine completion. Yikes. Anyway, they voted again. This Polish Archbishop Wojtyla, I'm sure I said that wrong, Wojtyla, he came back to Rome to vote, and they had a conclave, and they had 7 votes and 7 ballots, and they were deadlocked. So they picked Wojtyla as a compromise. He was 61, which is younger than most popes. He was not Italian. That was a big deal. He was kind of athletic. That was unusual. Opus Dei was very happy because they've been courting him for years. And then they had been using what was called the Roman Center for Priestly Encounter, which the acronym from the from the Italian is CRIS, C-R-I-S. Well, maybe it was the acronym from Spanish. Nevertheless, it was CRIS, C-R-I-S, which I think is interesting. In Rome, the idea was it was there to support lost souls, but really it was a money trap to capture likely higher-ups that were visiting Rome, and they were sort of courting potential money, potential higher-ups, and they had worked on the new pope, and it had worked. Opus Dei was struggling after the death of Escrivá and Franco, and then all the scandals. So now they were implicated in a paramilitary overthrow of Chile's democracy, with money from the conservative U.S. foundations that were helping in Chile. They were also involved in a defamation scandal in Spain. Really hard times for Opus Dei. Del Portillo, the head, he didn't like Escrivá, or it wasn't like Escrivá. Like, he didn't have temper tantrums and outbursts of ego. He didn't like to berate members. He wanted consensus of all the elders in the group. So first he ordered the removal of the listening devices that Escrivá had put in. He wanted to return to the original purpose of the group, sanctifying every act in life. But he owed a lot since 1946 to Escrivá, and he felt torn. He felt loyalty to the memory of the founder. He knew Escrivá's control had been out of control, but he felt obligated to kind of keep up his stuff out of loyalty. So it was he was too weak to address the contradictions in Opus Dei. Escrivá had left instructions, and he wanted people to continue to follow them, and they were a gift. And Portillo wanted to fulfill Escrivá's dying wish, which was to get Opus Dei a higher church status. So he met with Pope Paul VI and then with John Paul I, but John Paul I died before he could make a decision about Opus Dei. So 2 weeks after the election of John Paul II, he met with him, and of course he was greeted very warmly, and John Paul II told him, this is not an audience, this is a family meeting. So writing's on the wall. A few days later, he got a letter of congratulations from the Pope to Opus Dei on their 50th anniversary. So it was obvious that Opus Dei was going to be on its way up under this new Pope. Luis didn't like the excesses that were happening, and he had moved out of the Madrid residence and was living in a country house in the mountains owned by the bank. It had been used for bank employees' vacation spot. It had a pool, a soccer field, walking paths. Luis closed it. No more vacations for the employees. He said it cost too much to upkeep. And then he took it over for himself. But this gave him newfound freedom and autonomy from the rules and regulations in the residence. So after he made chairman, he built a new headquarters called Beatrice Building, It was modern, and it took up an entire block in the center of Madrid. It was named for a former Renaissance nun who left her order to be married, but would put on her nun's habit, to go for a walk around town. So for whatever reason, that appealed to him, and he named the building after her. He built a luxury penthouse on the top floor for himself, with a tennis court and a pool up at the top, secondary to his country place. His job was to hang on to Opus Dei power and influence. Franco had died. Franco was replaced by an Opus Dei member for prime minister, but the country was changing politics. So they still had their hands in the politics, but that was soon to be completely changed. Portillo worked to create the image of power, wisdom, and his part in the political elite, and he hosted political events at the bank, at the headquarters, invited the elite. Opus Dei had to legitimize its money flow. It had to explain that. So they set up all these nonprofits to hide the money. For example, they had the Hispanic Foundation, which gave $150 million to good causes. Opus Dei. So the bank is giving Opus Dei money. Opus Dei is running the bank. It's a scam. Opus Dei, especially for its schools, camps, young kids. These are the targeted new recruits. So they've got a little nest egg now given to them for that. They had 300 schools globally, but the teachers were not qualified teachers. They were Opus Dei numeraries who were loyal and trustworthy. For example, in 1969, they bought a big place in Friendship Heights in Washington, D.C. It became known as the Heights, and it was a school, and they put numeraries in as teachers, and the way that they justified that is they called them professional experts in their fields. Because young university students were not as interested in the late 60s and the early 70s, they redirected their recruiting to these younger kids and built boarding schools run by Opus Dei. There was a place called Warren College in the 1970s in Sydney, Australia, and they built residence halls there, but they failed. A lot of the problem was how they treated the students. The Australians weren't having it. They were not allowed to lock their doors in the residence hall. They weren't allowed to have mixed groups inside, gender inside, so girls couldn't come in and study. They actually did emotional blackmail of the students there too, like they had done before. They had required private counseling, and then all that information was given to Opus Dei to be used against them to manipulate them. One former resident called Opus Dei in the college a deadly form of cancer, and he wrote a big thing about this and said it was the duty of every thinking student to eradicate it. 6,000 copies of the school newspaper, this one particular issue that was on sexual freedom, 6,000 copies were stolen. They disappeared. And this led to a period of about 3 years of protests and unrest and college students up in arms against Opus Dei, wanting to get it out. They called Opus Dei the Holy Mafia, and signs went up around school, Opus Dei out now. They locked the fire doors in the residence hall to keep women out of the residence hall. And the guy in charge said, better the students burn to death than burn in hell. They were ordered open by the school. They complied. And then as soon as backs were turned, they relocked them and kept them locked. The money started to decrease, but Opus Dei ordered members to falsify their financial reports to Rome and also to the local banks so they could keep getting credit and money breaks. They complained about the stress of cooking the books the members did. This was really stressful on them. And one actually complained and then was given sedatives, kind of like required. The residence hall near Columbia University soon had a bad reputation for Opus Dei interference in student life. For example, they wouldn't let them spend more than 4 days with their families, and the students were beaten for talking to the press. It became so unpopular that Opus Dei eventually sold the building. So Luis, in the meantime, was struggling with how to clean things up. So if anybody looked, it didn't look bad. He was trying to clean up offshore accounts, especially this dodgy private bank in Switzerland called MF Bank. Opus Dei used their stake in MF Bank to buy secretly huge percentages more of stocks, shareholders share in the banks. And so they ended up owning 75%, and they did it underhandedly. They were working a money smuggling scam to park more money offshore than the government of Spain allowed. Spain would only let you take a certain amount of money out of the country, but they got around that. They covertly moved Opus Dei money out of Spain to Switzerland to shell companies offshore, and then they went back into Opus Dei operations globally with a total of more than $100 million in today's money. They lent money to the United States and Mexico Opus Dei members. They couldn't pay back the money, the millions of money they borrowed from Opus Dei. This put the bank, the MF Bank, into crisis. And to save it from collapse, a supernumerary bailed it out, this guy who was a billionaire. So this guy's name was Jose Ruiz Mateo. He was a businessman. I call him the sherry man. He made his business originally selling sherry, but he diversified. He was an entrepreneur. He was hugely rich. He had many businesses. There was a whole list of things that he did. He was one of the wealthiest men in Europe in the 70s. And he even tried to buy Sears Roebuck. He had 13 children. He was a big Opus Dei guy. He went to Mass twice a day. I cannot think of anything more boring, frankly, but he went to Mass twice a day. He made large regular donations to Opus Dei. He wanted in. He was trying to buy his way into the inner elite. Luis didn't really like him, but he courted him anyway. He pretended because he thought he was an uneducated Bulgarian, but he had money, so that's what mattered. Most of the top leaders of Opus Dei felt the same way about this guy, but they were happy to take his money. They wanted him to fund this new foundation, the Institute for Education and Investigation, and it was to finance educational schemes internationally. He donated what amounted to $100 million in today's money. I can't believe how they just toss out these huge amounts of money casually like it's no big thing. He was in tax trouble, this guy, Mateo. The Opus Dei could get him out of it with a political favor because they're connected to such a scam. 3 months after John Paul II was elected, Opus Dei applied for special status. Could they be what was called a personal prelature? This is a structure that was created for priests who weren't tied to a specific diocese geographically, and therefore not answerable to an archbishop. So how it works usually, you join an order, and the order has all kinds of leaders and is in contact with the Vatican, and you become a priest in that order. You have hierarchy over you. But you can become a diocesan priest, which is the same kind of priest. You just don't adhere to any one particular order's more narrow set of rules. You're just sort of a generic priest. And you're associated with the diocesan seminary, which is run by the church in a geographical area. So I'm getting hiccups, sorry. For example, if you were in California and you wanted to become a priest and you lived in Los Angeles and you didn't care about being a Jesuit or a Dominican or whatever, you would just go to the Diocesan Seminary of Los Angeles, answerable to the Archbishop of Los Angeles, and eventually he would consecrate you a priest. But now they were suggesting something entirely different, where Opus Dei could sidestep all of that. It could ordain its own priests and not have an archbishop breathing down their throat, looking at their books. This would be ambiguous, but in the way it was written, it didn't really, it was supposed to be for priests. It wasn't supposed to be for organizations, but Opus Dei would use it to its advantage. The Vatican was slow to get the law specifically written since it became a thing. So Vatican Council made this prelature thing a possibility, but they hadn't written the canon law on it. It was agreed they were going to do it. They just hadn't gotten around to it yet. Opus Dei knew if they jumped in right away, they could manipulate the writing of the law to be able to ordain its own priests and also have an organization devoted to lay people and just sidestep all the rules because they would help to write the rules. John Paul II urged the bishops to take Opus Dei into consideration. The bishops who were getting together to decide this, they didn't want to. They threw Opus Dei's application out. They said they have no grounds for this special treatment. And it was because they knew that they were corrupt and they knew they didn't like their tactics and they knew they were weird and they didn't want to deal with them. The Pope intervened over widespread objections across the entire church. Opus Dei convinced John Paul II that they would be his personal battalion. John Paul II was new and feeling vulnerable, and a personal army sounded good, especially one that could influence public opinion and that was conservative. They had his back. Opus Dei bragged to John Paul II about infiltrating education and infiltrating the media. And they also lied to him about their numbers. They tried to make themselves sound more important than they really were. The Pope intervened for Opus Dei and would let Opus Dei bypass the regular church channels, the hierarchy. This caused all kinds of frantic protest inside the Catholic Church. They were afraid that this would make Opus Dei be a separate branch of the church itself with total autonomy, and it's kind of what happened. The Pope was being challenged for his conservative views, and he feared that what was going to happen next is people would start questioning his infallibility. And he liked the idea of having backup support. So he was very conservative and people didn't like it and they were pushing back. And this idea of infallibility is when the Pope makes a statement about doctrine, like what is the belief, the dogma, and the doctrine of the church. He could not make a mistake. He was God's representative on earth. He was getting a direct line to heaven and he was right. You couldn't argue. But he was afraid that people were going to question this about him because they really didn't like his policies. So he liked the idea of having Opus Dei as his backup support. He reined in the Jesuits. Jesuits are always the mavericks of the Catholic Church. They're the ones that are more independent, more critical thinking, often more educated. I hate to say it, but it's true. And, well, for example, the Jesuits went with the conquistadores to the New World. They were the missionaries. They went to the New World. But they weren't towing the party line in accordance with both the church and the state. They were too independent in what they were doing. And so they got recalled back to Europe, and the Franciscans got sent out instead. And the Franciscans were more malleable with the, Isabel and Ferdinand and all that. But That's why the Franciscans started the California missions, because the Jesuits got kicked out. So the Pope reined in the Jesuits. Once again, they were in trouble. He suspended their constitution, and they put one of his guys as their superior general. So that's a big blow. It really wrecks their autonomy. John Paul II saw the Opus Dei as kind of a tool for power. Former members saw this as dangerous. People who knew what was going on and quit, they thought this was dangerous. More Opus Dei autonomy would lead to more of an abuse of power with impunity. So, for example, John Roche, who was an Irish numerary, he leaked internal documents about the systemic Opus Dei abuses. He leaked them to the media and to the Archbishop. And the Archbishop was appalled, and he ordered a stop to Opus Dei's recruiting and to the control of members in his diocese. But even Ratzinger, who later became the Pope, he was against Opus Dei, and he was allegedly a Nazi. He saw Opus Dei as a church within a church, which really, that's exactly what it was doing. So I'm going to warn you that there's some discussions about people dying and things happening and implications of suspicious situations. So I'm just telling you, this is the information from the book. I'm not advocating or alleging anything myself. So in April of '82, the bishops who were deciding submitted their report to the Pope for approval, and Opus Dei got its approval. So in May, there was a Turkish guy who made an attempt on the Pope. He ended up almost dying. But he approved Opus Dei's new status from his hospital bed, and there was outrage. As news came to the cardinals and bishops around the world, opposition to Opus Dei flooded into the Vatican, with more than 60 cardinals voicing opposition. The Spanish Catholic Church, which knew Opus Dei better than anyone else, was particularly opposed. Ignoring calls for a pause in the process, the Pope pushed on. By 1982, Opus Dei's new status was in striking distance. In June 17th of 1982, we then had a banker, Roberto Calvi, found dangling from Blackfriars Bridge in London. He had pockets full of thousands of dollars of foreign currency, and he had been weighed down by bricks. He was the chairman of the old Milan Bank, and he was found to be secretly giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the network of shell companies in Panama and Liechtenstein that were owned by the Vatican. He was taken to trial. He was prosecuted, taken to trial. He got a 4-year suspended sentence. Gives a whole new meaning to the term suspended sentence. But the bank kept him on as, even though he was a felon, as the scandal was uncovered. And there was more scandal that the Vatican was owning companies and getting $1.4 billion secretly out of the country. At that point, Calvi vanished. So he was fired from the bank, and because he vanished and got fired from the bank, it didn't happen the other way around. He vanished, and the bank was like, well, he didn't show up for work. He had to clock in. And so they fired him. And his secretary exited through her tall office window. So his death was determined to be his own doing. However, it was revealed that 2 days before he had done an interview and he had described threats against himself and expressed great concern about these threats. He described his situation as precarious. Quote, survival is an environment that is fast becoming one of religious warfare is not easy. Oh, surviving in an environment that is fast becoming one of religious warfare is not easy. In this environment, any barbarism is possible. I think this is a translation from the Italian, and it's just a little awkward. But he's saying that we're in the middle of a religious war, and survival is not guaranteed. Okay, so it was discovered that John Paul II asked him to solve the Vatican's losses because of the scandals, the money losses, and that's what ended up happening to him. His son went public. Calvi had been negotiating with Opus Dei to bail out the Vatican Bank. His wife called it a risky business politically and economically. Opus Dei had negotiated with the Vatican. Opus Dei was giving money in exchange for power to determine church strategy in communist and third world countries. So you had this scandal going on, and you had Opus Dei taking this moment to offer money to help bail out the Vatican Bank and the Vatican itself in exchange for more power. Opus Dei wanted the ability to determine politics in, church strategy is politics in communist countries and in third world countries. His wife asked, Calvi's wife asked, was he assassinated to prevent completing a conservative project like the one with Opus Dei? There was a jury inquest, a second one, and the result was inconclusive. It was never proven that Opus Dei was involved, even after later police and parliamentary investigations, more than one, into secret societies. It shows how the majority of the church did not trust Opus Dei, and it shows what their relationship was with the new pope. August 23rd, 1982, Opus Dei became the first personal prelature of the church. And even before the canon law was written, how it would proceed, how it would be governed, they were made that status. Eventually, there were glaring contradictions between what the Pope okayed them to do and the canon law that they helped write. And it said that the Pope had let Opus Dei ignore canon law. Well, they let him write it. Portillo knew canon law. That was his area of expertise, and he knew how to take advantage of it. And he took advantage of it for the next 40 years. So the government of Spain stepped into all this mess. Now, mind you, you've got the Vatican in Italy, and you've got Opus Dei in Spain, and you've got both structures, both power structures pushing back, and Opus Dei is prevailing. It's really kind of scary. So in 1983, there was a new socialist government in Spain, and it went after Ruiz Mateo, the sherry billionaire, for unpaid taxes. The Spanish prime minister expropriated everything he owned. Luis had been trying for months to help him. He thought that even advising huge amounts of money, he told him, put huge amounts of money into a safe deposit box that you can get to so that you will have cash on hand to bribe people to get you out of trouble. But Luis was secretly really not helping him. He thought, but Luis was not. He was against him. He secretly ordered a halt to any bank business with Matteo's companies. He questioned Matteo to clean up any possible leaks. He wanted to encourage him to hide your tracks. Luis advised him, and he took Luis's advice. He fled in the trunk of a Mercedes to France and then flew to London and hid with Opus Dei members. Meanwhile, the Spanish government found about $50 million in secretly that had secretly been sent to Panama or had been converted to cash. So the Spanish government is digging in and finding all this stuff. They discovered, this is really, all roads lead to the same place. They discovered that the central figure in this whole scheme was a Swiss lawyer, Alfred Weidecker, who had profited during World War II from helping Jews escape the Nazis for a price. And he had set up the first Opus Dei Foundation in Switzerland. He got some of the money back to the Spanish government. Matteo accused Luis of setting him up to take the cash in the safe box, and Luis took it. He told him it's for bribes, and as soon as Matteo was distracted, it disappeared. Matteo, at that point, had had enough, and he started leaking stories about Luis's corruption. Matteo said, "I never met Calvi, but some people say I will end up like Calvi." Luis flew to London to calm him down, and it didn't work. He felt betrayed. He realized there were two sides. Matteo realized there were two sides to Opus Dei: the spiritual philosophy, and then what he called the Opus Homini, the work of humanity, which was human beings, corrupt, powerful men like Luis. He wrote a 45-page letter to Portillo to root out the evil that had infected Opus Dei. He appealed to Portillo's compassion. Good luck. And right after he sent it, he got a visit from somebody from Opus Dei headquarters. The visitor said, "How is your soul? Have you been following the norms?" That's the rules and regulations. When he asked whether, this is Matteo we're talking about, when he asked whether the head of Opus Dei, Portillo, had a response for him, the emissary replied, "What letter?" The 45-page letter. "What letter? Do you know that you could die tonight? You could have a heart attack, or you could die of cancer?" I think that's called a not so well-veiled threat. Portillo was busy at a formal ceremony at this time. While this threat was being made in person by Opus Dei to Matteo, Portillo was at a ceremony to create the prelature of the Holy Cross and Opus Dei in the Basilica in Rome. Opus Dei was optimistic about the future. They now had legitimacy in the eyes of the church, and they had money. Matteo was arrested by Interpol. He went public with his accusations against Luis and Opus Dei. They had bitter, years-long battles in court. And now, what's next? Hints about beatifying a scriba. Beatification is the first step to being made a saint. So that's the end of today's video, and the plot thickens. Hope you're enjoying this scandalous tale of corruption. I'm sure everybody's really shocked to hear about it. Not. So thank you very much for watching. Keep in mind, they're still operating today. Slán go foil. Slánte.